The dying sunlight painted the Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold as Annabelle Vance clutched the worn newspaper advertisement in her trembling hands. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new beginning lay beyond the horizon, past the rolling plains where wildflowers danced in the summer breeze. Her threadbare dress, once of vibrant blue, had faded to the color of a forgotten promise, much like the life she'd left behind in Chicago after the fever took her parents and the bank took their home. Last stop before Willow Creek. The stagecoach driver called, his voice as rough as the terrain they'd traversed for the past 3 days. Annabelle gathered her single carpet bag, containing all that remained of her former life: a few dresses, her mother's silver hairbrush, and exactly $17.43. At 22, she had never imagined herself traversing half the country alone, but desperation had a way of rewriting one's story. "Miss, you sure this is where you want off?" the driver asked, eyeing the desolate landscape with skepticism. "Ain't much out here but dust and rattlers." "I'm sure," Annabelle replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She unfolded the newspaper clipping once more. Housekeeper wanted. Room and board provided. Inquire at the Morgan Ranch, 3 miles north of Willow Creek. The driver shook his head. "Morgan Ranch, you say? That'd be Mason James's place. Lost his wife, 'bout 2 years back. Been raising them little ones all on his own since." He pointed toward a distant rise. "Follow that trail there. Can't miss it, only house for miles with that big cottonwood standing guard." Annabelle nodded her thanks and stepped down, the dust immediately coating her worn boots. As the stagecoach rumbled away, she squared her shoulders and began walking, each step taking her closer to whatever fate awaited. The June sun beat mercilessly upon her bonnet as she followed the winding trail. In the distance, a weathered sign swung from a post. Morgan Ranch. Behind it stood a modest but well-maintained 2-story farmhouse, with a barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby. A massive cottonwood tree offered blessed shade near a wooden gate that had clearly seen better days. As Annabelle approached, she noticed movement on the porch, a small figure darting behind a rocking chair. Drawing closer, she realized it was a child, a little girl with wild blonde curls peeping out from her hiding place. "Hello there," Annabelle called gently. The child disappeared completely, and moments later, the front door swung open. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. 2 more children clung to his legs, another little girl, and a boy barely old enough to walk. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep but cautious, like a man unaccustomed to visitors. Annabelle lifted the newspaper clipping. "I've come about the housekeeper position, Mr. James. My name is Annabelle Vance." The man stepped forward into the light, and Annabelle's breath caught in her throat. Despite the weathered lines around his eyes and the untrimmed beard that covered his jaw, Mason James couldn't have been more than 30. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, regarded her with unmistakable wariness. "Didn't expect anyone to answer that ad," he said. "Put it in the paper nearly 3 months ago." Annabelle's heart sank. "Is the position filled, then?" The little boy at his feet let out a wail, and Mason scooped him up with practiced ease. "Not filled, no. Just didn't think anyone would come all the way out here." He studied her for a moment. "Where are you from, Miss Vance?" "Chicago, most recently," she answered. "Though I was raised in Pennsylvania." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a long way to travel for housekeeping work." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. James." Annabelle straightened her spine. "And I'm very good with children." As if on cue, the little girl who had been hiding rushed forward, her curiosity overcoming her shyness. "Did you bring candy?" "The last lady who came brought peppermints." "Sarah," Mason admonished gently. Annabelle knelt, bringing herself to the child's level. "I'm afraid I didn't bring candy, but I do know how to make molasses taffy if your father has the ingredients. Sarah's eyes widened with delight, and she turned to her father. Can she stay, Papa? Please. Mason shifted the boy in his arms. Why don't you come inside, Miss Vance? It's too hot to be standing out here, and these little ones need their supper. He nodded toward the house. We can discuss the position while I show you around. Annabelle followed him through the gate, which creaked loudly as it swung open. That gate's been needing fixing for months, he said, almost apologetically. Inside, the house was clean but clearly in need of a woman's touch. Mason introduced his children Sarah, age 6, Elizabeth, called Lizzie, age 4, and Thomas, just 2. They had their father's blue eyes and their mother's fair hair, from the portrait that hung above the fireplace. My Emma, Mason explained, catching Annabelle's gaze on the painting. She died of childbed fever after Thomas was born. I'm so sorry, Annabelle said softly. Mason nodded, a shadow crossing his face. It's been hard on the children. They need stability, structure. He looked around the kitchen, where mismatched dishes were stacked haphazardly and a basket of unfolded laundry sat on a chair. I've done my best, but the ranch takes most of my time and the children. I understand, Annabelle said. If you'll have me, Mr. James, I'd like to help. He studied her for a long moment. The work isn't easy. The house, the cooking, helping with the children. We're 3 miles from town, and winters can be harsh. I'm stronger than I look, she assured him. And I'm not afraid of isolation. Mason seemed to come to a decision. Room and board, plus $8 a month. You'll have Sundays to yourself, though I'd appreciate it if you'd watch the children while I attend church. That's more than fair, Annabelle said, relief flooding through her. There's one more thing, Mason added, his expression serious. These children have already lost their mother. If you take this position, I need to know you won't just up and leave when the work gets hard or when some better opportunity comes along. Annabelle met his gaze steadily. Mr. James, I have no family and nowhere else to go. If you give me this chance, I promise I'll do right by you and your children. Something in her words seemed to satisfy him. All right then, Miss Vance. Welcome to Morgan Ranch. That evening, after the children were fed and put to bed, Annabelle sat at the kitchen table darning socks by lamplight. The quiet work gave her time to process the whirlwind day. The children had warmed to her quickly, especially Sarah, who had shown her every doll and treasure she owned. Thomas had fallen asleep in Annabelle's lap during the story she'd read, his small body trusting and warm against hers. Mason entered the kitchen, startling her from her thoughts. You don't need to do that tonight, he said, nodding at the socks. You must be tired from your journey. I don't mind, she replied. Idle hands never suited me. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. Where did you work before, in Chicago? I was a seamstress at Marshall Field's, she answered. Before that, I helped my mother with her millinery shop. And your family? Annabelle's hands stilled. Gone. My parents died of influenza last winter. The bank foreclosed on our home and the shop. Mason was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry for your loss. As I am for yours, she replied softly. The silence between them was comfortable, each recognizing in the other a familiar pain. Finally, Mason stood. Your room is at the top of the stairs, first door on the right. The children are across the hall. I sleep downstairs off the kitchen. He cleared his throat. The children rise with the sun, so you might want to get some rest. Thank you, Mr. James. Mason, he said. If you're going to be living here, you might as well use my name. Annabelle nodded. Good night, Mason. Good night, Miss Vance. Annabelle, she corrected with a small smile. Annabelle, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her heart flutter unexpectedly. The first weeks at Morgan Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Annabelle fell into the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast, tending to the children, keeping the house in order, and helping Mason with the garden that had been neglected since Emma's death. The work was exhausting but satisfying, and she found herself sleeping more soundly than she had in years. Mason was often out working the ranch with his two hired hands, Eli and Joshua, but he always returned for meals and spent his evenings with the children. Annabelle observed how he listened patiently to Sarah's stories, played gentle roughhousing games with Thomas, and braided Lizzie's hair with surprising dexterity. "You're good with them," she remarked one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. The summer twilight stretched long across the plains, painting the landscape in soft purples and blues. "Had to learn," he replied. Emma was the natural parent. "I was all thumbs at first." "I don't believe that for a moment," Annabelle smiled. "They adore you." Mason's expression softened. "They're easy to adore." He glanced at her. "They've taken to you quickly." "Children usually do," she said. "I've always found them to be better judges of character than most adults." "Is that so?" A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth, a rare sight that Annabelle had come to treasure. "Yes," she nodded firmly. "Children and dogs. Speaking of which, when were you planning to tell me about the puppy hidden in the barn?" Mason's eyebrows shot up. "How did you? Sarah has been smuggling scraps after every meal," Annabelle laughed. "She's not nearly as subtle as she thinks." "That dog was supposed to be a surprise for her birthday next week," Mason groaned. "Eli found him abandoned out by the creek." "Your secret is safe with me," Annabelle promised, enjoying the way the fading light softened his features. In moments like these, she could almost forget she was just the hired help. As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch took on new colors and rhythms. Mason and his men spent long days bringing in the hay crop and preparing the cattle for the coming winter. Annabelle preserved the garden's bounty, filling the root cellar with jars of peaches, beans, and tomatoes. She taught Sarah to knit and Lizzie to braid, while Thomas followed her everywhere, often clutching her skirts with his small, sticky hands. In the evenings, after the dishes were cleared, Mason would sometimes play his fiddle while Annabelle taught the girls simple dances. These moments of levity revealed a side of Mason she hadn't initially seen: a man who could laugh, whose eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, who hummed under his breath while he worked on his ledgers. One crisp October afternoon, Annabelle walked to town with the children to purchase supplies. At the general store, she encountered a cluster of women who fell silent as she approached. "You must be the new housekeeper at Morgan Ranch," one woman said, her tone cool as she appraised Annabelle's simple dress. "I'm Harriet Simmons, the pastor's wife." "Annabelle Vance," she replied, extending her hand. "Pleased to meet you." "Such a shame about Emma," another woman interjected. "Such a lovely person. The children must miss their mother terribly." "They do," Annabelle agreed carefully. "They speak of her often." "I'm sure they do," Mrs. Simmons said. Mason was devastated when she passed. Some thought he might follow her to the grave, the way he carried on. Annabelle felt Sarah press against her side, the child's small hand finding hers. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation another time," she suggested, nodding toward the children. Mrs. Simmons had the grace to look abashed. "Of course. Will we see you at church on Sunday?" "Mason brings the children most weeks." "I'll be there," Annabelle promised, quickly gathering their purchases and ushering the children outside. "Miss Annie," Sarah asked as they walked home, "do you think Papa is still sad about Mama?" Annabelle chose her words carefully. "I think your father will always love your mother and miss her. But I also think he's finding joy again, in you and your brother and sister, and in the life you're building together." Sarah considered this. "He laughs more since you came," she observed. "And he shaved his beard." Annabelle felt her cheeks warm. She had noticed the beard's disappearance 3 weeks ago, but hadn't commented. "Well, sometimes a change is good for everyone." That Sunday, Annabelle accompanied the family to church, wearing her best dress, a deep burgundy wool that she had carefully altered to fit current fashions. As they entered the small, white clapboard building, she was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. "Folks are just nosy," Mason muttered as he guided her to a pew with his hand at the small of her back. "Don't pay them any mind." The service was pleasant enough, though Annabelle noticed how often Pastor Simmons spoke of family values and the proper order of households. Afterward, during the social hour, she found herself separated from Mason and surrounded by the town's matrons. "How are you finding life at the ranch, Mrs. Simmons inquired, passing Annabelle a cup of weak tea. "Very fulfilling," Annabelle replied honestly. "The children are wonderful, and Mr. James is a fair employer." "Just an employer, is he?" another woman asked, her tone implying something quite different. Annabelle straightened her spine. "Yes, Mrs. Peterson. Margaret Peterson. My late husband was the town doctor." The older woman's eyes were shrewd. "I only ask because there's been talk. A young, unmarried woman living under the same roof as a widower with 3 children. Well, people will gossip." "There's nothing improper about our arrangement," Annabelle stated firmly. "Mr. James has been nothing but respectful, and my reputation is intact." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Simmons soothed. "No one is suggesting otherwise. It's just that Mason has been alone for so long, and he's quite a catch despite his circumstances." Annabelle was saved from responding by Thomas, who came barreling into her skirts at full speed. "Miss Annie, Papa says can we go home for pie now?" Relieved, Annabelle excused herself and returned to Mason's side. The ride home was quiet, but she could feel his gaze on her periodically. "I'm sorry about that," he finally said as they approached the ranch. "Small towns and their wagging tongues." "It's all right," she assured him. "I've dealt with worse." Mason's hands tightened on the reins. "What did they say to you?" "Nothing worth repeating," Annabelle replied. "Just concerns about my living arrangements." The muscle in his jaw tightened. "I can find you lodging in town if that would make things easier for you." "No," she said quickly. "The children need me here." She hesitated. "Unless you'd prefer I lived elsewhere?" "No." Mason's response was immediate. "The children need you here," he echoed, though something in his voice suggested there might be more to it than that. As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch grew isolated under a blanket of snow. The cold drove them indoors, where evenings were spent by the fire reading, sewing, or playing quiet games. Annabelle taught the children to make paper snowflakes and strung popcorn garlands for Christmas. She secretly sewed new dresses for the girls and a warm coat for Thomas from fabric she'd ordered from the mercantile. For Mason, she knit a thick blue scarf, working on it late into the night after everyone was asleep. Sometimes, as her fingers worked the needles, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she was more than just the housekeeper, where the gentle warmth in Mason's eyes when he looked at her meant what she hoped it might. But those were dangerous thoughts. Mason had hired her to care for his children and his home, not to replace his beloved Emma. The portrait still hung in the parlor, a constant reminder of the woman who had come before. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that transformed the ranch into a glistening wonderland. Annabelle spent the day baking pies and roasting a goose, while Mason and the children decorated a small pine tree he'd cut from the north pasture. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, and the children's excitement was contagious. After supper, they gathered by the fire to exchange gifts. The children squealed with delight over their new clothes and the wooden toys Mason had carved. Sarah received her puppy, now quite a bit larger, with gasps of joy, even though the surprise had been an open secret for months. "And this is for you, Miss Annie," Sarah announced, presenting a crudely wrapped package. Inside was a frame made of popsicle sticks, containing a childish drawing of 5 figures, the 3 children, Mason and Annabelle, all holding hands in front of a house. Our family, Sarah explained proudly.
See?
That's you with the yellow hair. Annabelle's throat tightened with emotion. It's beautiful, Sarah. I'll treasure it always. When it came time for Annabelle's gift to Mason, she suddenly felt nervous. It's nothing special, she said, handing him the wrapped scarf. Mason unwrapped it carefully, running his fingers over the intricate pattern. You made this, he said, not a question but a statement of wonder. I did, she admitted. The blue matches your eyes. A look passed between them, something unspoken but powerful enough to make the air feel charged. Then Thomas climbed into Mason's lap, breaking the moment, and Lizzie demanded a story before bed. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet except for the crackling fire, Mason found Annabelle in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes. I have something for you, he said, holding out a small box. I didn't want to give it to you in front of the children. Curious, Annabelle dried her hands and opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a rose, small but exquisitely crafted. Mason, it's beautiful, she breathed. But I can't accept this. It's too much. It was my mother's, he explained. I want you to have it, Annabelle. She looked up at him, confused by the intensity in his gaze. Why? Because you've brought life back into this house, he said simply. Into all of us. Annabelle's heart raced. I've only done what you hired me to do. Mason shook his head, taking a step closer.
No.
You've done far more than that. He took a deep breath. The children think of you as family. So do I, if I'm being honest. Mason. Annabelle wasn't sure what to say, afraid to hope for what his words might mean. I know it hasn't been very long, he continued, and maybe this is foolish of me, but I've been alone for 2 years, and I never thought I'd feel this way again. He took her hands in his. Annabelle, I find myself thinking of you at the oddest moments when I'm out checking fences or counting cattle. I think about your smile and the way you hum when you're cooking and how Thomas falls asleep on your shoulder. I think of you too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason's eyes softened.
Do you?
In what way? In every way, Annabelle confessed. But I never thought.
Emma
would want me to be happy, Mason said firmly. She would want the children to be happy. And you make us happy, Annabelle. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it deepened as Annabelle responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Mason rested his forehead against hers. I don't want you to be my housekeeper anymore, Annabelle. Her heart dropped. You're letting me go? No, he laughed softly. I'm asking if you might consider being my wife instead. Annabelle stared at him, stunned. Your wife? Mason, are you certain? More certain than I've been about anything in a very long time, he assured her. The children already love you. I'm halfway there myself. His expression grew serious. But I need to know, could you be happy here, on this ranch, with me and 3 children who aren't yours by birth? Annabelle thought of the drawing Sarah had given her, of the family they had already become. They may not be mine by birth, she said, but they're mine in my heart. And yes, Mason, I could be very happy here with all of you. His smile was radiant as he pulled her close again. Is that a yes then? Yes, she laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. Yes, I'll marry you, Mason James. They were married on New Year's Day, with the children as their attendants and the whole town bearing witness. Mrs. Simmons looked smug, as though she'd predicted it all along, while Mrs. Peterson wept openly during the ceremony. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it new life across the ranch. The garden Annabelle had tended so carefully burst into bloom, and Sarah's puppy grew into a loyal companion who followed the children everywhere. Mason built a proper fence around the yard and finally fixed the creaking gate. One warm evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the children chase fireflies across the yard, Mason reached for Annabelle's hand. "Any regrets?" he asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. She smiled, looking out at the life they were building together. "Only that I didn't find your gate sooner." Mason laughed, pulling her close.
Well, Mrs.
"James, you're here now, and that gate will never be lonely again." "No," Annabelle agreed, resting her head on his shoulder as the last light of day painted the Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. "Neither will any of us." 2 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, the Morgan Ranch welcomed another child, a daughter with Annabelle's green eyes and Mason's determined chin. They named her Hope, for what had brought them together and what sustained them. The hope for love, for family, for belonging. And though life on the frontier was never easy, bringing with it droughts and blizzards, lean years and abundant ones, the family at Morgan Ranch faced it together, bound by something stronger than blood or circumstance. What had begun as a desperate search for work had become a journey home, to a place Annabelle hadn't known she was looking for until she found it waiting at a lonely gate, with a family ready to love her as fiercely as she loved them.